much. It's really a pleasure to be with you today, and really thank you for joining both the ShipMD workshop as well as the Reimbursement Workstream session. Again, my name is Chester Coe. I'm a pediatric urologist at Texas Children's Hospital in Houston, Texas, as well as professor of urology at Baylor College of Medicine. My specialty is robotic and minimally invasive surgery in children. I also serve as a contact PI for one of the FDA P50 supported pediatric device consortia, which we call ourselves Southwest PDC. Joining me as our co-lead, and you'll hear from Gordon after my portion of the presentation, Gordon Schatz is a lawyer as well as president of Schatz Reimbursement Strategies. He does have a 25-year experience with medical devices and Medicare, so we'll be looking to him as our resident expert. I have a disclaimer, I'm not a reimbursement expert, but Gordon definitely is. Next slide. So we do have many people to thank. We have quite a few members of this particular work stream, the reimbursement work stream. You've heard from some of us, as well as the panelists who will join us later during this presentation, both Wade Aubrey as well as Tina Ivovich. We also have a lot of thanks to give for all the workstream members who have joined the multiple calls and practice sessions over the past year. And we really want to thank them, each of them personally. They have been really a tremendous source of expertise and assistance, and we thank you. We also like to thank both our leads at CPATH, as well as the executive committee of ShipMD, as well as all the coordinating committee members for all of us really working together for this effort to help pediatric patients. And just a reminder of what the mission statement is for ShipMD. We are really trying to improve the public health for children. And we know that ShipMD is needed to transform that pediatric medical device ecosystem, which is currently challenged. We know that we need to de-risk and accelerate development, and especially within the children's hospital system, to stimulate both investment and innovation in pediatric devices, so more of these innovative devices are available for children. And just as a reminder of the overview, we are currently in phase 1. This is the pre-consortium conceptual phase. And specifically this session, we are definitely looking to you as the audience, especially in the Q&A as well as further conversations, for your feedback on really the work that has been done to date in the reimbursement work stream. We are trying to come up with innovative ways that reimbursement can be improved to help pediatric device development and provide needed resources and funding to have these devices developed so more devices can reach kids. And really, just an overview of what the presentation will be. There are some appendices that we will not be able to get to likely during this presentation, but we will talk about some challenges of reimbursement regarding pediatric devices, or some of the goals and opportunities, how we believe that coverage, coding, and payment can be improved. It's really the tenets of reimbursement, as well as some examples how to improve it, as well as develop some guidance. And really where ShipMD, we think, can play a major role in this, and then conclusions. We do have a charter. All the work streams have worked on this, and it'll be worthwhile to spend some time to actually what our charter is. Number one, we want to engage attendees, the audience today, in active discussion to better understand how ShipMD and reimbursement can be improved to help kids. We do want to prioritize the goals and strategies for reimbursement that can optimize both the value of ShipMD as well as advanced innovation for devices. We really do need your input to verify that these high value and high priority targets are the ones that ShipMD should be going for, as well as to make sure that we have involved all the needed pediatric medical device stakeholders. And finally, we do want to achieve alignment among all the different stakeholders: reimbursement, regulatory, hospital, finance, and other aspects or components of pediatric device innovation to work together towards this common goal. We do know that there are challenges, most likely well known by many of us in SHIP-MD coordinating committee as well as in the audience. But just as a reminder, we know that there's insufficient payment to hospitals and innovators. Hence, that's why new devices are not being developed easily these days. We know that the process for reimbursement can be slow and often is not coordinated with FDA regulatory approvals and clearances. We know that these reimbursement pathways can be quite complex, and navigating through them can be unclear and unpredictable, and that actually can affect both the investment in this area. And finally, we know that it can be very difficult to manage the multiple decision makers regarding reimbursement. And so with those challenges in mind, we believe that we have identified both goals and opportunities for optimizing reimbursement, how SHIP-MD can take action. We know that the Workstream has seen that we need payments to be increased. We know that we need the process of codes coverage payment needs to be sped up. We know that FDA and reimbursement decisions do need to be harmonized. And finally, it would be helpful to have a clarification of the reimbursement process, which can help, for example, with investment in this area. And we have identified, and we are looking for your feedback about the opportunities for SHIP-MD to take actions to address these problems and goals for solutions. We believe that we need to engage both the FDA and CMS to build new Medicaid pathways. There are several actually available already in Medicare, but as many know, Medicaid is a much larger government payer for the pediatric population. We know that advocacy to Congress likely will be needed for both additional funding as well as a new pediatric device reimbursement system. We know that we need to engage with state Medicaid programs, specifically the medical directors of those state Medicaid programs, especially in the states in which SHIP hospitals are located. We need to continue the dialogue with private payers who often can support innovative devices and their use in patients. We know that we need to implement education programs regarding reimbursement as well as navigational tools. And then we also need to initiate fundraising for reimbursement. This is both public-private as well as matching grants and other areas that will provide the needed funding. And this will be my last slide, but this is a timeline that has been proposed of where we believe that the current status is and moving forward. I won't spend too much time on this, but we know that there are both short-term and long-term goals. And some of these are really what we've just discussed in terms of the goals, and we put it into a timeline. Maybe I'll just go quickly through them. At the top is really about Medicaid reimbursement improvement, advocacy for statutory changes, working with state Medicaid programs, working with private payers, implementing educational tools and navigational tools, working together to improve fundraising for reimbursement needs, and finally launching SHIP-MD with a continued attention paid to reimbursement. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Gordon for the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Chester. I'd echo Chester's appreciation for the tremendous input we've had from the Workstream members. I'd also like to thank all of you in our virtual audience, because there's no question you also bring experience or thoughts about how reimbursement fits in to supporting innovative pediatric devices. Chester and I welcome your questions during our presentation, and we encourage you with any comments, certainly when we're finished. So thank you for being here, and we will look forward to getting your comments. As I move into, as Chester mentioned, these sort of three fundamentals of coverage, coding, and payment, let me try and illustrate them, turning back for a minute to Chester so that he can give us an example of the kind of patient that he sees in his practice, and I'm going to use that to walk us through these three components.
Sure. Thank you, Gordon, for the opportunity. I would like to say, as I mentioned in my introduction, I am a pediatric urologist, and my specialty is robotic and minimally invasive surgery for children. For example, one problem that we do fix are kidney blockages. It can be called hydronephrosis or water in the kidney. That's a swelling that one may see in the kidney. And the true term for that is really UPJ obstruction. And really, my device need story is that unfortunately we do not have the instrument sizes for robotic surgery actually anymore. And this is a relatively new development. There is one primary robotic system used for abdominal surgery, like we do in pediatric urology. The previous model had 5-millimeter instruments, which is what I use mostly. I would say the standard for laparoscopic or minimally invasive surgery is to use 3-millimeter or 5-millimeter instruments. I tell you that the newer model for the robotic system does not have 5-millimeter instruments anymore. This was discontinued in December. Many of us will eventually be forced to use 8-millimeter instruments because you do not make the 5-millimeter instruments in the newest system. And the current system we're using will be sunsetted by 2024. So that's a challenge. We don't have the devices in the sizes we need for our smallest patients. Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks, Chester. And I think it's a perfect example. If we ask the question, what does Chester and his hospital need? They need three things to simplify the solution for reimbursement challenges. Number one, they need to get Medicaid or private payers to cover it. That means when he's using his robotic surgical device to treat pediatric patients with kidney blockages, the payer has to say, we'll cover it. That's almost a yes or no question. It also may raise the issue of what kind of patients, in what setting, under what circumstances. Robotic surgical devices have tremendous application. They could be covered for some earlier indications, as Chester mentioned, for certain kinds of abdominal, but not for kidney blockage. And so what we recognize in many technologies is that they show incremental innovation. But there's a point where Chester's use of this in his pediatric patients may represent a breakthrough. And early in the regulatory process, SHIP can be instrumental in helping the hospital, the doctors, and the manufacturer of that product get coverage early. It's going to open the faucet of reimbursement waters, and it could help certainly move the beginning of payment early in the commercial process. Coverage is not the only challenge, but the hospital and the doctor need to have billing codes so that when they fill out the claim form that's going to go to the patient's insurance company, that insurance company will be able to recognize some of the distinct features of the procedure and the technology. It's crucial in order to accurately distinguish the technology and the associated procedures, and also create an opportunity for recognizing and paying for the product. So you want to have the opportunity under coverage to open the faucet. The code is actually one of the pipes through which that water is going to run. And then we get to the last crucial issue in reimbursement for innovative pediatrics devices, and that's payment. There may be payment structures for the general kind of laparoscopic surgery that Chester does, but when it's being applied for his pediatric patients, he will probably need, just to back up a second, robotic-assisted laparoscopy codes and payment, because that robotic system adds costs to the hospital. And by providing what might be more water flowing through the faucet and through the pipes, it's going to provide the necessary financial resources early in the development of this innovative device to support the hospital's purchase and use. Let me give you an example of how this fast-tracking reimbursement might work. We heard yesterday, and you certainly will hear more, particularly in the regulatory work stream, about the crucial role at the FDA in starting the recognition process. And if there is or can be an expansion and enhancement of the pediatric breakthrough device designation, together with that device being delivered to a pediatric patient in a ShipMD network hospital, or what's frequently understood in the reimbursement world as a center of excellence, those key pieces can combine to, number one, expedite early coverage for a Category B device. This is also Category B, a classification that the FDA recognizes when the manufacturer applies for an investigational device exemption or early FDA clearance. The potential for starting reimbursement during that early stage can be a tremendous boost to the hospital, the doctor, and certainly the manufacturer. Second, when we get these two FDA device breakthrough designations in a SHIP hospital, that may trigger or enable early coding that's technology specific, both for the hospital and for the physician, so they can put those codes on the claim form, get it to the payer, and then they can make the coverage decision and ultimately that payment decision. I'm going to talk a little bit more about NTAP, new technology add-on payment, particularly as we go to our next slide. There are existing Medicare pathways which have become valuable in recognizing innovative new devices, but because Medicare is the federal program which covers senior citizens, individuals who are 65 years of age and older, disabled, these existing pathways do not apply at all with respect to pediatric patients. As you've heard, Medicaid is a crucial part of the complex reimbursement system. And in order to transfer some of these opportunities, our work stream and SHIP would like to consider some specific suggestions. But first, let's take a look at what exists right now. As you know, the FDA, one of the branches of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, has an Office of Product Evaluation and Quality. And manufacturers will go to that office. They can get a breakthrough device designation, which again is a more recent process. They can get a humanitarian use device, a humanitarian device exemption, or an investigational device exemption, all of which are potential regulatory triggers to improve reimbursement. I mentioned if this is an IDE, investigational device exemption, which leads the manufacturer to a PMA, a pre-market approval, the FDA can assign the device Category B. And under the current Medicare system, that can start and open the faucet for coverage for that Category B device during the IDE. So the hospital can get paid early. The other opportunity is with the breakthrough designation. If you can see far to the right, Medicare will start the process of recognizing this NTAP, new technology add-on payment to the hospital, and also expedite Medicare coverage for innovative technologies. It's affectionately known as MCIT now, and the final regulation was just issued in the end of December. Now, our observation is that we can build off of those models. We can help migrate them over to the Medicaid program with very similar opportunities. All the way to the right in green, you see what these new opportunities are, which when we get a similar breakthrough device designation for Medicaid, that could trigger a new technology add-on payment and MCIT, the Medicare Coverage for Innovative Technology. And likewise, Medicaid could start early during the clinical trial to allow reimbursement to flow to the hospital for those Category B devices. We recognize this could be a heavy lift. And the reason for that is many of the Medicare opportunities were created through new statutes, new legislation. As Chester mentioned in the timeline, this is not a simple or short-term process. Our U.S. Congress is very preoccupied now, and we're looking at a tremendously significant piece of legislation to treat the COVID pandemic. So we've got to look at opportunities that will come up when Congress can shift its attention. But it may be that within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, they can exercise some of their authority and discretion to begin moving towards Medicaid opportunities. But we're also mindful it may take a much longer legislative process. As we look at these opportunities, we're also mindful that in the complexity of the reimbursement world and what I've just discussed are top-down approaches where we're dealing with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and the Center for Medicaid and CHIP State Innovation. So there are some administrative offices that are in place now, and we're beginning to make that outreach. We're beginning to see the potential for linking the FDA with these offices in order to create attention at the top and bring it down to the level where Chester and his hospital and his patients are. Because the bottom-up approach looks at each one of the 50 states, but probably with a special focus, because SHIP-MD is not going to be working initially with 50 states. It's going to be working where the hospitals who've qualified are located, and with those state Medicaid programs, and particularly with the state Medicaid medical directors, who we believe have got to be part of the dialogue about how can we advance reimbursement for innovative pediatric devices. Chester mentioned that there are also in place FDA-supported pediatric device consortium. And again, this underscores the fact we can't be everywhere at the beginning. And we're going to have to think carefully when we look at where we can get reimbursement, whether it's a couple of selected Medicaid states, private payers who operate in those regions, and see as a pilot program how we can help the reimbursement flow to particular hospitals and learn from that before we scale it up to a national level. It's very important to recognize that there are a lot of reimbursement decision makers. In the private payer section, here are just a couple of examples of the bigger players: United Healthcare, Aetna, Cigna, Kaiser, and other integrated delivery networks, Humana, the Blue Cross Blue Shield plans, many of which have a individual state focus, Anthem, Highmark, sometimes are spread across multiple states. But these are part of the private payer industry, which we know have a commitment to serving their members and also a fiduciary responsibility to make coverage decisions and payment decisions, which are going to necessarily support their financial operations. We believe there is a place for special reimbursement for pediatric innovation within the private payer sector, And they may also not be subject to some of the longer-term effort that we know may be needed uniquely within the government setting, Department of Health and Human Services, FDA, CMS, Medicaid, and maybe even requiring, as mentioned, legislation. So perhaps we can get some quick uptake dealing with private payers. We also know that in trying to optimize the reimbursement decision-making process, making structural changes and opening the faucet, creating ways to get that water flowing, that there may be value for the innovation community just to understand what is in place now. It is complex and the reimbursement environment is changing. And again, to use an analogy that's developed in Medicare, there's a wonderful reimbursement guide for innovators. We've got the link, you can check it out, but it's intended to try and help particularly newcomers to the innovation space get one source of information about how to navigate the ups and downs, the pitfalls, the quagmires, the quicksand of reimbursement. And SHIP could also play a valuable role in an educational sense. Just what are the structures? How do you get started? Where do you go through? How do you have to plan? And that could be the SHIP MD guide to reimbursement for innovative pediatric devices. Because, to the credit of SHIP MD, they've already brought together a lot of the stakeholders. It would make sense if this were a joint educational project of FDA, CMS, private payers. It could be an online reimbursement library. It could provide linked regulatory and reimbursement workshops so that a company early in the process could look at the different pathways through the FDA and appreciate, well, if I get on this track, it could lead me to a reimbursement opportunity. Education can be a crucial part of optimizing reimbursement. A couple of final slides, and then I'd like to turn it back to Chester. You've seen yesterday some of the timelines in terms of the development of a pediatric device, and we'd like to add the reimbursement pieces here. This is what you saw yesterday, sort of the current, particularly the early stages, and some of the FDA pieces. Where could reimbursement fit in? And if you follow me along the bottom section here, very early in the development and conceptualization of the device, reimbursement could take the form of what's already in place. Grants, NIH, NSF, SBIR, BARDA, I think was mentioned yesterday. There could be new federal, state, local pediatric device innovation grants. You may have to go to Congress to get that, but there are funds currently at the Department of Health and Human Services which we need to activate. And certainly there are foundations which could be part of the early seed money to support other traditional sources of finance. As I move from the left to the right, this is B, in the same way that a lot of manufacturers benefit from pre-submission meetings with FDA, the same is true in pre-submissions with payers, whether it's a state Medicaid program, Anthem, Kaiser, Aetna. We need to start that dialogue early because reimbursement is not a one-shot decision. It's an ongoing dialogue with the payer and find out whether, as I move to the right, early coverage will be available. As you can see, this links in immediately above to the breakthrough designation by FDA, to whether the FDA and the manufacturer believe that an IDE or an EFS, an early feasibility study, are appropriate. But to get that moving early and to trigger the new technology add-on payment. Currently, there's some restrictions even there until after the product is approved. But in the pediatric space, we may be able to improve upon some of those Medicare precedents. Likewise, hospital and physician billing codes could be issued early in the process to get breakthrough coverage and payment. A lot of moving this early in the process can help generate health outcomes data, to look carefully at the economic impact studies. So many payers want to know, will this be cost effective? And a lot of innovative pediatric devices can actually save money in the larger system, and certainly generating the kind of scientific publications which will demonstrate the value in the clinical and also in the economic settings. Chester, do you want to pick up, take us through the last few slides?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Thank you very much. And I also, if our audience, they're getting close to about 100 of you. Really, thank you for joining us. Start thinking about your questions and put them in the Q&A to prepare for the panel discussion. So we realize that there's several partners that will need to be working together towards reimbursement, and that'd be, of course, the specialty. Look at the bottom, going around to the right, the specialty societies of physicians who can advocate, as well as patient and family advocacy groups, as well as research communities, all working together for both reimbursement, advocacy, collaboration, as well as education. And this really is one of our final slides. We are assuming and thinking that this is where ShipMD can play a role in terms of optimizing reimbursement. We are looking for both short-term and long-term tactics to optimize reimbursement, as well as clarify those pathways for the ShipMD device manufacturers and hospitals. We know that we need to open and continue that dialogue with the payers, both government and private, and on the public side, CMS, state Medicaid programs, start advocacy for new legislation with Congress, as well as continue to work with the private payers. And finally, one other role we believe ShipMD can play is really implementing comprehensive advocacy and educational initiatives within the ShipMD ecosystem, and then, of course, expanding nationwide, starting in a small pilot area and then moving nationwide. So with that, in conclusion for the presentation, before we move to the panel discussion, we know that reimbursement must accelerate coverage, coding, and payment to support innovative pediatric device innovation. We know that we cannot increase the size of the population. We are smaller than adults. We know that we have most likely relatively less use of devices, but we still need those devices for kids. And one way is speed. Another is reimbursement needs to integrate closely with the regulatory processes, as mentioned during this presentation. And finally, we believe that optimizing the reimbursement should continue to be a key function of the ShipMD ecosystem.